For thousands of years, humans looked at the sky with the same quiet jealousy. Birds could rise, glide, disappear into the clouds. Humans could only point, dream, and fall. Kings funded flying machines. Inventors strapped wings to their arms. Daredevils jumped from towers believing faith could replace physics. Most failed, many died. And by the end of the 19th century, the world had almost given up. Then, in a small bicycle shop, run by two quiet brothers no one took seriously, the impossible finally began to move. This is the story of Wilbur and Orville Wright, two men with no money, no formal education in engineering, and no powerful backers. Two men who were laughed at, ignored, and nearly erased from history. And how flight almost never happened. Before the Wright brothers ever touched the sky, America itself was changing fast. The late 1800s were loud and restless. Factories were rising, cities were swelling, trains cut through land like steel veins. The Industrial Revolution was reshaping how people lived, worked, and thought. But science had limits. Electricity was new, cars were unreliable, and heavier than air flight? Most experts believed it was a fantasy. Newspapers called it a dream of fools. Leading scientists claimed it would take 1,000 years, if it happened at all. This wasn't an age that welcomed dreamers. It rewarded efficiency, speed, and profit. Wilbur and Orville Wright didn't come from wealth or influence. They weren't born into laboratories or universities. They were born in Dayton, Ohio, sons of a bishop who valued books, curiosity, and independent thinking. Their childhood was simple but rich in imagination. Their father once brought home a small toy helicopter, powered by twisted rubber bands. It flew for a few seconds, then fell. That brief moment stayed with them. Years later, Wilbur would say that toy never left his mind. But life didn't unfold gently. Their mother, Susan Wright, died when they were still young. She had been mechanically gifted, the kind of person who could fix household appliances without instructions. Her influence lingered in their hands, in their patience, in their need to understand how things worked. Neither brother attended college. Wilbur planned to, but an injury from a hockey stick ended that path. Orville dropped out of high school to start a printing business. Failure arrived early, so did resilience. They eventually opened a bicycle shop. Bicycles were the cutting-edge technology of the time, symbols of balance, motion, and control. Without realizing it, they were already training for flight. In 1896, news spread across the world. A German engineer named Otto Lilienthal had died in a glider crash. Lilienthal was the most successful flyer of his time. If he could die, what chance did anyone else have? For most, it was a warning. For Wilbur Wright, it was a challenge. He began reading everything ever written about flight, not casually, but obsessively. He studied birds not for romance, but for mechanics, how they shifted weight, how they adjusted wings, how they controlled balance more than power. That's when the brothers realized something most experts had missed. The problem wasn't engines, it was control. Many inventors focused on raw power, believing stronger engines would force machines into the air. The Wright brothers believed the key was balance, steering, stability. If you couldn't control an aircraft, flight was meaningless. So they built gliders, cheap ones, fragile ones, ones that failed again and again. And instead of giving up, they took notes. They wrote letters to the Smithsonian Institution asking for data. They trusted no one fully. When numbers didn't match reality, they assumed the books were wrong. That kind of confidence wasn't arrogance. It was necessity. In 1900, they traveled to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, not because it was beautiful, but because it was lonely, windy, and unforgiving. The perfect place to fail in peace. Local fishermen watched as two strangers dragged strange wooden frames across the sand. Some laughed, others shook their heads. Who did these men think they were? Their first gliders barely worked. Lift calculations were off. Wind behaved differently than expected. Crashes were frequent. But instead of quitting, they did something revolutionary. They built their own wind tunnel. Using scraps from their shop, they tested hundreds of wing shapes. Hundreds. No one had done this before at such scale. Slowly, quietly, the math began to change. The sky was no longer a mystery. It was a problem being solved. Then came the engine. No company wanted to help them. No manufacturer believed them. So they built it themselves. A homemade engine, light, fragile, barely powerful enough. A propeller system designed from scratch, treated not as fans but as rotating wings. Everything about their approach was unconventional. Everything about it worked. On December 17, 1903, in freezing wind and sand, Wright lay flat on the machine. Wilbur steadied the wing. The engine roared. The machine moved. And then, for 12 seconds, it flew. Not jumped, not glided. Flew. 120 feet. Low, shaky, real. No cheering crowd, no journalists, just 5 witnesses and a camera placed on a tripod. The world did not notice. In fact, many newspapers refused to believe it. Editors mocked the claim. Scientists dismissed it as exaggeration. The Wright brothers had achieved flight, and almost no one cared. The years that followed were some of the hardest. They continued improving their aircraft, but recognition came slowly. Governments doubted them, investors laughed. One newspaper called them liars or lunatics. Ironically, Europe believed before America did. France invited them to demonstrate. And when Wilbur flew publicly in 1908, the crowd fell silent. This was no accident, no fluke. It was controlled flight. Suddenly, the same people who mocked them called them geniuses. But success came with a cost. In 1908, during a demonstration flight, a propeller failed. The plane crashed. Orville survived with severe injuries. His passenger, Lieutenant Thomas Selfridge, became the first person to die in a powered airplane crash. Flight had proven itself, and proven its danger. The brothers were shaken. Wilbur especially carried the weight of responsibility. They had unlocked something powerful, something that could not be taken back. The sky was open now, to wonder and to war. Here's something rarely mentioned. The Wright brothers did not want fame. They did not chase applause. They guarded their work fiercely, filing patents and fighting lawsuits for years. Some say this slowed aviation progress. Others argue it protected it from reckless misuse. The truth sits somewhere in between. Wilbur died young at 45 from typhoid fever. He never saw airplanes cross oceans or reshape cities. Orville lived longer, watching jets break the sound barrier. By then, flight was no longer a miracle. It was normal. And that may be the greatest irony of all. What once seemed impossible became ordinary so quickly that people forgot how close it came to never happening at all. Today, every plane that takes off carries their legacy. Every runway is an echo of Kitty Hawk. Every controlled landing owes something to 2 brothers who refused to accept the limits of their time. They weren't fearless, they were careful. They weren't reckless, they were patient. They didn't conquer the sky. They learned how to listen to it. So the next time you look out an airplane window and see the world shrink below you, ask yourself something simple. How many times did this dream almost die before it reached you? Because flight didn't arrive with applause. It arrived with persistence, silence, and 2 men who believed gravity was not a law, just a challenge waiting to be understood.